So you're saying with Hilton Honors, I can use points for a free night stay anywhere?
Anywhere.
What about fancy places like the Canopy in Paris?
Yeah, Hilton Honors, baby.
Or relaxing sanctuaries like the Conrad in Tulum?
Hilton Honors, baby.
Ooh, what about the 5-star Waldorf Astoria in the Maldives?
Are you gonna do this for all 9,000 properties?
When you want points that can take you anywhere, anytime, it matters where you stay. Hilton, for the stay. Book your spring break now.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish Podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of Schmurz Day, April 13th, 2026. On the show today, news and maybe a preview of Rock and Roller Coaster songs, plus listener questions. Then in our main segment, Jim tells us about Disney's Live the Dream project for Disneyland's second theme park, with hotels built on top of attractions. Let's get started by bringing in the man who says we've never seen a cave painting of salad. It's Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
It's going well, Len. But I want to remind folks that the first vegetables to be consumed by humans were likely wild plants. You have to remember, mankind didn't switch from foraging to farming till more than 11,000 years ago. And just a note here, the 2 wild plants that were popular were figs. Those were cultivated in the Middle East and Western Asia, and then peas. Peas were actually are among the oldest domesticated crops. They are initially native to the Middle East, but because they were so easy to grow, they quickly traveled the world and became a staple. Just a side note here, Len, given that these 2 crops, figs and peas, factored so heavily in early trade, it just makes you think back to a time when to give a fig or to take a pea had an entirely different meaning.
Entirely different meaning. It's also, maybe that's where we get the Princess and the Pea story from, because peas were so ubiquitous.
There we go.
Wow.
By the way, for those of you who thought I got all of the bathroom jokes out of the way last week with Crane's bathroom tomorrow, no such luck.
One more week of it. It's fine. It's fine.
There we go. There we go.
All right, Jim, let's do a quick shout out to our subscribers. Thanks to everyone who subscribes to the show over at patreon.com/JimHillMedia, including Deb Bray, Janet Pellegrini, Mandy Erickson, Marty Moose, Paul Lanham, and Diane Whiting. Jim, this is the Disney Imagineering team trying to diagnose why animatronic Olaf fell over during his debut in Disneyland Paris a couple of weeks ago. So far, they've narrowed it down to either a problem with the gyroscopic sensors or the fact that many of Olaf's parts came from the Gerald Ford animatronic at Hall of Presidents. True story.
I like that. Okay.
On to the news. Folks, the Disney Dish News is sponsored by UnlockedMagic.com from our friends at DVCRentalStore.com. Sure, you've got a family trip to Walt Disney World next year. You're still going to need a secret trip by yourself to get good at Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger spin, though. Our friends at UnlockedMagic.com have discounted theme park tickets that'll put you in galactic hero status while your kids are still saying, "Oh, look, green lasers." So get your theme park tickets at UnlockedMagic.com now and show those kids you still got it. All right, Jim, the news. We have a reopening date for Big Thunder Mountain of May 3rd. In the Magic Kingdom. And also, Jim, did you notice the height requirement is now lower? Gone down from 48 inches to 38 inches, which means more kids will be able to ride. What do you make of that?
Wow. Okay. Going to be interesting to get on board this. And this thing's been around since 79 with that height limit. I wonder if we're going to notice any changes to the actual train cars. Maybe they beefed up the foam on the lap bar, two inches lower, though. That's interesting.
I mean, the thing with lap bars and kids is that the lap bar height is set by the person with the biggest legs. As Laurel reminds me when I sit down with her and she's sloshing around the ride vehicle.
Okay.
They could do a couple of things there. If they've actually changed the track, they could have made the turns less intense. Right? There's a lot of things they could have done there. around that. They could have also modified the ride vehicles. You know, if they put the seat lower, that changes your center of gravity, I guess. Yeah, we'll see. But I'm excited to see more kids being able to ride this.
No, that's great news.
Yeah, it was the first ride that Hannah ever went on as a roller coaster in Walt Disney World. So it's a special place in my heart.
Wow, cool.
All right, Jim, we might be getting a preview this week of one of the songs from Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets as well. Have you heard this?
Yeah. Now, we've got a media event coming up. Is that when this is supposed to debut?
So we have two things here. We've got a media event that is supposed to be scheduled the week of May 18th. I wouldn't know because we don't get invited to those things.
Yeah, well.
I know. Exactly. That would make Memorial Day a possibility for Rock and Roller Coaster. And I did hear that we're supposed to hear a preview of one of those songs. And yeah, Dan, what the artist might be for that song?
I had heard that everything in this attraction is Muppet centric. So it's Dr. Teeth interpreting. I'd also heard that they're leaning heavily into, the established Muppet catalog. So like moving right along from the Muppet movie. I have to admit, I'll be intrigued to see what they decide to trot out to give us a taste of what we're going to hear on Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets.
Right. I thought that the bulk of the music was definitely going to be Electric Mayhem covers. I'd be surprised if they used many songs from the Muppet movies because of the name Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets. And a lot of those songs aren't really what I would consider rock and roll, which is a whole separate subject, like what I consider rock and roll. Here's my one thing. If they were going to get artists to perform with Electric Mayhem, the obvious one there is the most recent host of the Muppet Show, which is Sabrina Carpenter. I mean, and if they could get Sabrina Carpenter to do a song, that would immensely boost the appeal of the ride to younger generations, right?
It would. That said, it is important to understand that again, putting on your touring plan hat here, ride time on Rock and Roller Coaster was 70 seconds, 90 seconds.
Yeah, you're getting snippets here. You're getting clips, montages, best ofs, right? I mean, the good thing is that the trend in modern music is to do 3 and 3.5 minute songs that get to the chorus very, very fast, right? So the first minute and a half is probably interesting for all the songs, so that could work out.
Okay, all right. Well, again, I'll be intrigued to see what Disney brings out later this week as the first of the songs in rotation there.
Exactly. All right, Jim, let's get on to listener questions. Brian writes in with this. I've now seen the giant ham and cheese crepe at Epcot's France Pavilion and have two questions. One, is this not a handwich? And two, the French of late have a less aggressive reputation, but should we really be tempting the country that invented the guillotine with this? Brian's got 2 points here, and I'm saying I agree with both of them, right? Have you seen this, Jim? I put a photo of this new giant crepe in the show notes. It looks for all the world like a handwich.
Yeah, and Len, look, realistically, it's not a handwich unless, as you're holding it, mayonnaise runs down your forearm.
Exactly.
I get, they look alike, but again, it's not the essential experience. Condiments in your elbow.
If the seagulls don't follow you all the way around World Showcase Lagoon, did you even eat a sandwich? Exactly. All right. Peter writes in with this. With the reopening of Space Ranger Spin and the fact that you can get trading cards with your score and rank on there now, I have aspirations of attaining Galactic Hero's status card, signing it and giving it to Buzz at a meet and greet while saying, "You're welcome." I kind of like this idea, actually.
I do as well. Am I allowed to put this in my wallet next to my driver's license, though? Or?
Yeah, I would think this counts as valid voting proof of ID, right?
I agree.
Thank you for that, Peter. All right. Brandon writes in with a suggestion for Piston Peaks rides, and he's got Adventures by Disney TM presents, Pixar's Piston Peak Pursuit, an immersive family off-road frontier adventure, featuring Disney/Pixar cars TM, individual lightning lane TM available. Availability limited, restrictions apply. I think we've peaked here, Brandon. It's one thing to put the sponsor and all the punctuation in there. I had never thought to include legal disclaimers, but yes, that's what you do, Brandon. Very good.
I agree.
Pascal writes in with another one. It's Pixar's Cars, Piston Peak, The Legend of Lightning McQueen, Craft, Drafts, and Barbecue! Exclamation mark. Okay, fair. All right. Matt writes in with a question that I had not thought of before, but it's this. There's a story element of Tron that has bugged me since my first ride, and I don't understand why the Imagineers made this choice. I'm hoping you or Jim can explain. The story is that we need to pass through 8 light gates before the other team. Fair enough. It gives us a reason to twist and turn and go fast. Here's the issue. The first 6 gates are pretty clear and easy to count. Gates 7 and 8 are right at the end of the ride and right next to each other. It's almost impossible to even see the 8th gate. Why does the 8th gate exist? Why isn't the story that we have to pass through 7 gates? The cost of building the 8th gate is probably negligible compared to the whole cost of the ride, but it probably wasn't zero. Someone had to plan it, build it, bolt it down, and light it up just so I could miss it at 60 miles an hour. Is there any reasonable explanation for this? Yeah, so Jim, I mean, how much more would it have cost to build the ride with enough extra track for a real 8th gate?
That is fascinating. And more to the point, is it just what is it? Alliteration, 8th gate. That we get kind of a same sounding name, or
I mean, yeah. If there's one thing I think of when I think of Tron, it's that the dialogue is just poetic license writ large. Sure.
Okay.
But Scholl worked on Tron for Shanghai, right? The original Tron, right? We can ask him this question.
I would that we'll have to put it out there to our own veteran Imagineers, see if there is a legitimate reason.
All right, I'll text him while we're talking here.
Okay.
All right. Last emails from Kelly. He says, our family is just back from Vegas, and I have 2 thoughts. Is Vegas a natural progression for Disney adults? And will Disney ever get in on the Sphere's tech? We love Disney, but can't drop $5,000 to get it fixed as often as we like. We stayed 3 nights in Vegas for free using hotel points. You can't really compare Vegas to Walt Disney World due to many not family-friendly things and a lack of the bubble, but we found many of the same draws here that we enjoy in Disney. The ersatz grandeur, so the Venetian, Caesars, Luxor, fabulous immersive entertainment at the Sphere and Meow Wolf's Omega Mart, which are both new obsessions for our family, and the huge number of great restaurants. There's even a monorail. My family happily dropped $700 to see The Wizard of Oz, a movie my grandma was watching back in the 30s. It's also created a huge Wizard of Oz fan in my 8-year-old daughter, and is probably introducing the movie to a whole new generation. Disney has so much IP that this concept feels like a no-brainer. I'd love to hear what you and Jim think the next Disney property should be for a good Sphere-like experience. So Jim, I mentioned the Wizard of Oz thing because I think I've said this on the show before. That was one of Hannah's favorite films growing up, and I watched it so much. I actually started critiquing the performance of individual munchkins in the Lollipop Guild scene. And in the show notes, I actually circled the one overly demonstrative munchkin in that scene that just drives me crazy. But okay. But going back to Kelly's point, what property would Disney have that would make a good Sphere show?
Well, okay. Now, I can say this because the Herseys and I just last month actually went to the Sphere and experienced The Wizard of Oz, which, want to stress here, is different than the film. In fact, they talk about how, the experience is going into the movie rather than watching the movie. I mean, the notion is it's not even the whole film. I want to say they've removed 20 minutes of it. And everything that I have heard from the Disney side of the fence is, well, there's one title that, comes right to the top when they talk about, the movie that people would want to go into.
Black Cauldron.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah,
The computer wore sneakers. What was it?
Well, more to the point, if you understand that as part of the Wizard of Oz experience, in the apple tree scene, they literally drop apples on the audience, little foam apples. So, and if you remember, Gurgi, munching and crunching's a red apple. Yeah, I mean, you could literally use the apple again. No, what I've been hearing is that, especially out ahead of the 50th anniversary of Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
A New Hope is supposedly being looked at. But at the same time, what's interesting is that Disney has already committed to next year, the actual 50th anniversary of New Hope arriving in theaters. The original cut, the one without the newly enhanced scenes that George Lucas created, will be returning to theaters. But supposedly at some point on the other side of that, that a Sphere experience involving Star Wars will debut. Though, as I understand it, there's a second Sphere now either already under construction or about to begin construction along the Potomac.
Really?
Yeah, in Washington, D.C. It will be smaller than the one in Vegas. In fact, that I guess is the one knock on the thing in Vegas. It's just too big. They've had trouble filling the thing, but they feel like if they adjust the size and they do the same thing, they put it in an area where there's already heavy tourism, that it will succeed. And this is the notion. Have it debut, with the Star Wars film. So, but what about you? What Disney film do you believe lends itself to the Sphere treatment?
Well, I was going to go along with what Kelly suggested in her email, which was The Lion King, especially that opening scene. You can kind of see that.
Oh.
Also, the Stampede scene. I mean, there's a lot you could do with The Lion King, right?
I would argue that you're not wrong there. I mean, just, for example, think about how Just Can't Wait to Be King would play on a giant screen like that. Yeah, no, I could definitely get behind that idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It was Kelly's idea in the original email, and I was like, oh yeah, that's the first one I thought of too. So yeah, that might make sense.
Okay, no, but yeah, just keep an eye on the project for the Potomac, and likewise, again, just remember next year is the 50th anniversary of Star Wars, and Lucasfilm just feels like evidently this is the sort of film that lends itself to again the Wizard of Oz treatment, where you go into the film rather than just watch it.
100%. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Love it. Love it. And folks, if you guys have a suggestion for Disney for a Sphere-like show, send us a note in the email. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Jim tells us about Disney's Living the Dream project for Disneyland's second theme park. We'll be right back.
Picture this, a curve in the road, a change in plans. Well, what do you say? With the all-new Audi Q3, the answer's always yes. Yes to adventure. Yes to escape. Yes to performance. Yes to comfort. Yes to right now. Because saying yes without hesitation, that's real luxury. The all-new Audi Q3, made for the yes life.
TaxAct is here anytime you want to easily file your taxes. TaxAct is here for the early birds who like to knock them out as soon as the season opens. And for the procrastinators who like to wait until the very last minute. TaxAct is also here for the middlers who file right in the middle of tax season. No one ever talks about the middlers, but TaxAct sees you, and TaxAct respects you. TaxAct, let's get them over with.
We all have that dream trip we've been wishing we could go on, but too often life, or usually price, gets in the way. That's why Priceline is here to help you turn your dream trip into reality. With up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights, you can book everything you need for your next adventure. Don't just dream about that next trip. Book it with Priceline. Download the Priceline app or visit Priceline.com and book your next trip today.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
And we're back. All right, Jim. Mm-hmm. Last week, we had talked about an article that Gabrielle Rason had done regarding depositions from between Disney and the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board. And one of those things was that the Magic Kingdom was planned for 1 or 2 more hotels. Mm-hmm. And that got us thinking where those hotels would go around the park, like central to the park where you could just walk in, right?
Yeah. And but what intrigued me about that story is that, I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, people would pay top dollar for this sort of experience to be able to have their hotel right outside the Magic Kingdom and, be able to have direct access to the park. But what's kind of interesting is if you chase down a copy of The Art of the Walt Disney World Resort, which, by the way, Disney Editions published back in January of 2009, in this 160-page hardcover, there's a piece of concept art that Disney legend Dorothea Redmond created back in the 1960s that had, it sort of demonstrates an entirely different vision for the Town Square Exposition Hall. You know this building, Len. It's the very large building, edge of Town Square, directly across the way from City Hall. What is it? Tony's Town Square restaurant shares a porch with this thing. By the way, before we get started on what would have been built inside of this building, I want to take a sec to talk about Dorothea Redmond's career at WDI. And mind you, she wasn't an OG Imagineer. She didn't join this arm of the Disney company till October of *64. But Walt personally considered Dorothea to be a very big get. You see, prior to her arrival at the Mouse House, Ms. Redmond had worked in Hollywood for decades as a production designer. She had worked with, for example, David O. Selznick on Gone with the Wind, and then with Alfred Hitchcock on 2 of his films for RKO, Rebecca and Rear Window. And long story short, Redmond had a gift for creating memorable, dramatic settings. And this is why, upon her arrival at WED in the early 1960s, Walt immediately puts her to work on projects of size for the park. This includes the Plaza Inn restaurant at Disneyland, likewise the show building that housed the original Pirates of the Caribbean.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now, and speaking of projects of size, Walt, toward the very end of his life, had concerns about the Contemporary Hotel down in Florida. His worry was that this 14-story tall structure was going to be visible from inside the Magic Kingdom. And now, mind you, this wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if you were standing in Tomorrowland. Right. But on the other hand, seeing this futuristic A-frame looming up over Main Street, that was going to pull you out of the turn-of-the-century story that they were looking to tell in that part of the park. And so Walt reportedly turns to Ms. Redmond and says, you got any ideas how we can address this issue? And, Dorothea then spends the next couple of days, checking out, they have the giant model of, what they're going to build in Florida and the concept art, and so she looks at what the sight lines were going to be, and then she gets back to Walt with a solution. And just to be clear here, in regard to seeing the Contemporary while standing on Main Street, USA, if you stood over on the City Hall side, this 14-story building was going to be visible, at least for the first few years the park was open. Now, Redmond started out by saying, look, I talked with Morgan Bill Evans, the head of horticulture for the parks, and Bill assured me that once the trees that he's going to be planting around the Magic Kingdom grow in, Contemporaries, it's going to fade from sight.
Redwoods everywhere.
There you go. All right. But if Walt was still genuinely concerned about the visual intrusion issue, there was something that the park could do. And so this is when Redmond shows Walt a painting that she had just done of the interior of the structure. Again, going to be built on the east side of Town Square. And at this point, Len, it's called the Gulf Hospitality House because it's sponsored by Gulf Oil. And, all right, the painting shows Dorothea's vision for, first, the elegant lobby inside of the hospitality house. But more importantly, if you look to the uppermost floors of this building, you can see in this concept painting, there's an interior balcony. And then just beyond the railing of that interior balcony, there's a series of hotel rooms.
Actual full-size hotel rooms?
Full-size hotel rooms. This is what Redmond's proposing to her boss, that the Magic Kingdom solve its visual intrusion problem by building first of all, they build the Gulf Hospitality House full-size. And again, that's going to be different than all of the other buildings along Main Street, USA. They're going to be done using the classic Disneyland design template, 7/8 scale.
Right. Yeah, this is what I was trying to figure out. Like, how do you do a full-size hotel at full scale when everything else is forced perspective? Like, how does that fit in?
Well, this is the thing. What Dorothea was selling to Walt was a boutique hotel. And that with the idea that the uppermost floors of the Gulf Hospitality House would be the most exclusive resort in all of Walt Disney World. Handful of rooms. More to the point, the guests would pay top dollar because they were going to get to do what only Walt Disney himself had previously been able to do, which was spend the night inside of his family fun park.
Asterisk legally. Footnote. Legally,
there we go.
Legally,
there we go.
Sure. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, so the apartment in Disneyland is full size.
Well, yeah, but even then, by the mid-1960s, problem is that Walt's grandchildren are growing. In fact, at this point, something that he and Lillian had really enjoyed doing, which was hosting all of Diane and Sharon's kids down, taking them for the weekend, bringing them to Disneyland, and they'd sleep in Grandma and Grandpa's apartment. But now the kids have grown, and there's just not physical space for all of these preteens. So it's in the same window of time that Walt turns to Dorothea and says, look, I need bigger digs. Can you design me a larger family apartment, which I'll have built at Disneyland? And which Redmond, by the way, did. But again, you got to remember, she's working on New Orleans Square at the time. So what she proposes is like, look, we have all this room on technically it's the third floor of the building above the queue for Pirates of the Caribbean. And how about I build you a family apartment there for you and your grandchildren? And, Walt signs off on this idea. So here's the plan, Len. Pirates was supposed to open at Disneyland in spring of 67, and then once the attraction was open, the workmen would then pivot to then building the Disney Family Suite, which, if they had been able to stick to the original timeline, Walt and Lillian would be able to begin hosting sleepovers for their grandchildren there by the fall of 67. And anyway, that was the plan. But, of course, in the fall of 66, Walt gets sick, and by December that same year, he's gone.
So have you ever been in this room? In the family suite?
Well, yeah. Now, what's kind of interesting is that starting in 87, this is where the Disney Gallery was. And I want to say it's late 90s, early 2000s, when they actually do turn it into a really for real suite. In fact, I remember being up there for a press event, and now it was fully decorated in a place where people could stay, but very, very charming space. I mean, it had, more to the point, had an absolutely killer view of Fantasmic from the outside balcony.
From the front, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that I remember from it was that you could go out back. I think there was like a place where you could lounge that directly overlook in the back that directly overlooks the pirate queue. So if you were on a lounge chair, the background music you heard was the Pirates of the Caribbean queue music. I told you that my one of my old developers, Henry, got to stay here one night for his honeymoon, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's how I got in it, right? So yeah, so I know people who've actually stayed there overnight. Anyway, all right, yeah. So it's a lovely apartment. Actually, it's very functional. The thing that amazes me is, again, going back to the forced perspective thing, you wouldn't know an entire family suite is back there.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
But again, that was, combination of Dorothea's skills and again, just, the artful way that New Orleans Square was built. But anyway, to get back to, again, it's just important to understand how much we lost when Walt died in December 15th of 66. I mean, Walt was the risk taker, whereas the organization that he left behind, it was loaded with all sorts of talented artists and designers like Dorothea, but and it also had a lot of motivated executives who were used to following their boss's orders. But the problem was, now that the boss was gone, there was no one to take orders from. And a lot of these people that Walt left behind, I'm being polite here, they were risk averse.
Yeah, well, no one wanted to screw it up, right?
No, that's exactly. Walt had built the company up over 34 years at this point, and nobody wanted to be the one who ran it into the ground. So this is when you get a lot of second guessing at Disney. And if we pivot back to Walt Disney World at this point, it's the first place where they're going to have on-site hotels. And important to remember that Disney organization had never run a hotel prior to Project Florida. And over the course of 67, Disney executives began to get cold feet, especially when it came to this part of the project. So this is when a new plan emerges, Len. The Imagineers will design Walt Disney World's hotel, but when it comes to the actual construction and management, that's going to be handled by U.S. Steel, and we've talked about this previously in the show, that U.S. Steel viewed the entire Walt Disney World project as, a showcase for, they had their new modular construction business, and the hope was that the hotel rooms that they were building for the Poly and the Contemporary, the world would beat a path to their door once they saw these things slid into place, and that's not what happened, but that's a story for another show. But anyway, U.S. Steel agrees to take on this aspect of the Walt Disney World Resort. They'll construct the hotels that the Imagineers design and eventually manage them once the resort is open. But they balk now when they're presented with this boutique hotel that WI wants to build on the upper floors of the hospitality house. And the folks at UST run the numbers, and they go back to Disney. It's like, this thing wouldn't make any money for us. It's too small. It's not going to turn a profit. And so the Imagineers for a time actually explore the idea, well, all right, what if we double the number of hotel rooms we have in this thing by putting an additional set of hotel rooms up on the second floor of the east side of Main Street, USA.
Yeah, still. I mean, how many hotel rooms we're talking about here?
Well, no, that's it exactly.
Yeah.
U.S. Steel runs the numbers again. And it's like, look, it's still too small to run a profit. Plus, these hotel rooms, first of all, where are the guests parking their cars backstage?
Right.
Also, how do we prevent the people who are staying in these hotel rooms after they get out of the shower, walking? It's like,
too. Yeah.
So this falls off the table in the mid-1960s. But this idea of building a hotel inside of a Disney theme park, especially to hide something, would get revisited. But we'll talk about that specifically in a sec. But first, this.
Welcome to Sephora.
I'm looking for a perfume that's not too perfumey.
I got you.
Serum moisturizer or moisturizer serum.
Let's get into layering.
My concealer is making me look worse.
Sounds like the wrong shade. Let's get you matched.
There's only one store that really gets what you're going for. Get beauty from people who get beauty. Only at Sephora.
Hi, Let's get you a basket.
No one goes to Hank's for spreadsheets. They go for a darn good pizza. Lately, though, the shop's been quiet, so Hank decides to bring back the $1 slice. He asks Copilot in Microsoft Excel to look at his sales and costs and help him see if he can afford it. Copilot shows Hank where the money's going and which little extras make the dollar slice work. Now Hank has a line out the door. Hank makes the pizza, Copilot handles the spreadsheets. Learn more at m365copilot.com/work.
And we're back. All right, so Len, we were just talking about Dorothea Redmond and the design work she did for Walt Disney World, specifically the boutique hotel, supposed to be built on the upper floors of the Gulf Hospitality House, known as the Town Square Exposition Hall. And by the way, this wasn't the only aspect of the Magic Kingdom that Dorothea worked on. You know those mosaics, the elaborate murals in the entry hall of Cinderella Castle?
Oh, yeah. They're fantastic. They're huge.
Yeah, 15 feet wide, 10 feet tall. Dorothea designs these things.
Wow.
And, and while she's working on Cinderella Castle, Walt's brother, Roy O. Disney, he pulls Dorothea aside and says, I got another project for you. I want to talk about a Disney family suite, but this one inside of Cinderella Castle. And irony here is that Roy O., just like Walt, liked entertaining his grandchildren. And he knew that once Florida opened, he was going to bring the kids down there.
Sure.
But, it's like, and I want them to be able to stay someplace special. We have this room up on the 4th floor of the Cinderella Castle. Can you do anything with it? And Dorothea goes off and designs a space. And, it's lovely. And the plan is park is supposed to open October of 71. Again, once the park is officially on its way, the workmen pivot and work on the space inside of Cinderella Castle, which they complete over the winter spring of 72. And then just in time for the kids to get out of school for the summer, the suite's ready and Roy's going to fly his grandchildren down and they're going to enjoy the Magic Kingdom in Florida.
Sure.
Again, a great plan, and Dorothea designed something wonderful. But then Roy O. has a stroke in December of 71, and we lose him at the age of 78.
Wow.
And so we now have two projects that sort of lay fallow. But as Len mentioned, having actually visited the Really For Real suite at Disneyland, that does eventually get built. Like I said, opens first in July of 87 as the Disney Gallery, whereas the Cinderella Castle suite, that doesn't come online for nearly 20 years. It's not up and running until July of 2006, and that's part of the. Do you remember this, Len? The Year of a Million Dreams, where
the best promotion that Disney Parks has ever run and will ever run? Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, what was fun about that is one guest a day. One family a day was selected to stay in the Cinderella Castle suite.
I've never actually been in that suite. I mean, it's one of the few places on property that the public has somewhat access to that I've never seen. I gotta work on that.
Well, what's fascinating about it, Len, is that I had a friend who worked in security at the time, and they always talked about how they'd select the family, and then they'd send them back to their hotel.
Go grab your stuff,
go grab your stuff. And then, they literally get them at the elevator to take them up to the suite. And they're like, don't worry about your bags. We'll take these upstairs. Let's take you up and show you the suite. And so, the family is loaded into the elevator, sent up to the room. And it's only then that Disney security would then bring out the bomb-sniffing dog.
I get it. I heard, too, that there were a number of families, not many, but some, who, after seeing this suite, declined and decided to go back to their original hotel room.
Well, part of it was the whole notion that we're going to put you in this at 11 o'clock at night and we'll come let you out at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was like...
Yeah, it's not like you can run around the park or anything. Sure, yeah, I get it. Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, just sort of like, wow, what a lovely, appointed prison cell. But anyway, back to Dorothea Redmond. After Roy dies, Dorothea kind of gets discouraged. She told folks who work at WED that she got spoiled during her early days of the company because when Walt was her personal patron, a lot of the stuff that she designed for the parks actually got built. And and that continued for the bulk of the time that Roy O. Disney was alive. But immediately after that, she's designing all these things that, again, are being run by a set of middle managers that, are looking over their shoulder and constantly playing the "What would Walt have done" game.
Yeah.
And she was like, "All right, I'm done." So she retires from WED in June of 1974, just prior to 10 years of the company. Mind you, she's made it an official Disney legend in the late summer of 2008, and that's just 6 months before we lose her, Len, in February of 2009 at the age of 98. But back in the 80s, Dorothea was kind enough to invite me to her home a couple of times. Up in the Hollywood Hills. No, she enjoyed the fact that I was familiar with her pre-Disney career. A lot of the films she worked on, so she was a great storyteller. But she loved her time working with Walt. But she would often talk about, that was the thing about Walt. He was obsessed with visual intrusion, that he wanted to make sure that when people were inside of his theme parks, that the real world, it fell away. It didn't exist at all. And this obsession, Len, dates back to the early 60s. And evidently, Walt learns that there's this developer who's about to build a 40-story tall hotel in Anaheim while it's not at the edge of Disneyland, it will be visible from inside the park. In fact, from basically every land in the park. So Walt goes to the Anaheim City Council and basically says to them, look, we bring millions of people to this area every year, and all of these hotels and motels around the property are making money off of Disneyland. So
but they're all like 2, 3, maybe 4-story hotels, like in the immediate vicinity, right? They were low for a reason.
That's it exactly. And so Walt argued successfully, I might add, to the effect of, look, you want to preserve this. Disneyland needs to be special in this way, and they agreed, signing off on what was known as the Anti-Skyline Ordinance. Now, interesting bend on the story, Len, and because it talks about the establishment of the bubble. And in this case, the bubble refers to that if you're standing inside of Disneyland, the height limits of the buildings around the park are set in such a way that, if you're standing at the direct center of Disneyland, and by the way, when Mr. Schul and I were in the park back in March, he made a point of pointing out the survey marker for the exact center of the park.
Where is it is it on Main Street? Where is it?
It's actually fairly deep back in Fantasyland, if you can believe it.
That's what is it behind the carousel?
I want to say it's actually closer to, say, Monstro the Whale.
Oh, okay. All right.
So anyway, the notion is that from that point, you're not supposed to be able to see anything visually intruding from inside of Disneyland. But they then, from that point backwards, buildings can, get taller and taller just as long as they don't visually intrude. But it's important to understand here that the survey work was initially done inside of Disneyland Classic, and that at no time did they consider, when you're out in the parking lot of Disneyland.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, just the notion of, look, you're in the parking lot. You're going to see the motel across the way. That's just the way it is. But what's ironic about that is I think we've actually talked on the show that there was a time in the early 70s when Walt was seriously thinking about taking a few acres of Disneyland and creating what was supposed to be a celebration of Californian living. That they were going to build.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 3 model homes out there. One was going to celebrate what it was like to live at the beach in Southern California. Another one was going to recreate what it was like to have a home out in Palm Springs, and then the third was going to be a modern cabin up in the high Sierras. And yeah, but again, no consideration about visual intrusion for that. But if we jump ahead to the late 1980s, the early 1990s, when Westcott, the West Coast version of Florida's Epcot Center, when that is starting to, make its way through the design process, the Imagineers are like, well, what do we do about this? Because you're going to stand in the park that we're building here in the parking lot, and like it or not, you're going to see modern day Anaheim right outside. No matter how high we build a berm, you're still going to see it. So what do we do? How do we fix this? And that brings us to the Live the Dream project, which we'll discuss in full on next week's edition of Disney Dish. But very interesting bend on taking the classic Disney theme park berm and turning it into, well, not just a mound of dirt, but a physical thing that houses ride shows and attractions, restaurants, shops, as well as guests who are staying overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of taking something that you physically need, for its utility, but then making it pretty and useful. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating story, which again we'll get to on next week's Disney Dish.
I'm super excited to hear it. Also, do you think it's funny that Walt back in the 60s was trying to tell people or sell people on the idea of living out in Palm Springs, and then they go out and they build Catino in the Coachella Valley?
Well, I mean, there are so much Disney history that folds back in on itself. I have to admit that, when I was Googling today, trying to dig up the information about the California Living Project from the 60s, that's the first thing that came up in Google was the new project out there. It's like, oh, well, okay.
I'm telling you, when I went to visit it, I went in the first house and I was like, I could live here, right? Like not in this community, in a nice house. I could live in the model home that they showed. It was that nice. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Very cool.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support our show by subscribing over at patreon.com/JimHillMedia, where our latest exclusive show is a walk through a changing Hollywood studios, and there's a link in the show notes. Also, occasional show guest, retired Disney Imagineer and all-around good guy Jim Schul hosts his own YouTube channel, Disney Journey with Jim Schul. And on his newest video, Jim talks about a time when every other Disney park was a studio park. He shares the reason why Disney studio parks were briefly the flavor of the month and why they've each disappeared. And there's a link in the show notes for that as well. On next week's show, Jim is going to continue the story of hotels in Disney theme parks. You can find more of Jim at jimhalemedia.com and more of me, Len, at touringplans.com. Also, check out The Case For with Chris Cox, a new podcast where Chris, Jim, and I debate one theme park topic at a time, and you get to vote on who's right. We're produced spectacularly by Eric Hersey and David Gray, who remind you that the secret ingredient is always love and maybe clarified butter for the 13th Annual Wisconsin Grilled Cheese Championship on Saturday, April 25th, 2026 at the Lay Memorial Pavilion in Herb Ayers Park off North Bennett Road in beautiful downtown Dodgeville, Wisconsin. Jim, I note there are 9 separate competition categories for the Grilled Cheese Championship. While Eric and David are doing that, please go into iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you'd like to hear next. For Jim, this is Len. We will see you on the next show.